Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. All right, and today's guest is Keith Gillette. Hello, Keith.
Hello, Adi.
It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks. I'm really enthused to be talking to you today. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And Keith is a process expert. That's why I'm so excited to have a process expert on my podcast. And yeah, Keith, I'll let you tell us your history in terms of your professional career and how you evolved into process documentation, etc. But the thing that you're doing right now is you are the founder of TaskTrain. And it is a SaaS company. And you basically provide a platform for process documentation. So you can document processes, procedures on your platform. And my listeners that know me, that are following this podcast, you know how I'm such an advocate of using a platform in order to document your processes and procedures, and not just using Google Docs or Word documents, but actually using a platform that the entire purpose of the platform is to document your processes and procedures. So you have a knowledge base, so you can use it as a task management tool. So you have version control. There's so many aspects of why you need to do that, and we're going to discuss that. But with that introduction, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got to this point.
Great. Well, I appreciate that background, Adi. I guess I'd characterize myself now as an emerging and a bit introverted entrepreneur, but my professional background has been in IT operations management. So I started way back as a college undergraduate as a support technician, and I worked as a network and systems administrator. But I quickly moved into IT management and leadership, primarily in K-20 education. So I've headed several IT departments, both in organizationally embedded leadership positions, as well as in virtual or fractional interim CIO roles. And I continue to do some of that CIO at your service, and related process consulting now. But as you said, I spend the bulk of my time on my software as a service startup, TaskTrain. And that TaskTrain really came out, though, of that management experience that I have. So the sort of the founding story of TaskTrain is that as a systems administrator, I was really just too often burned by the lack of documentation. So I became diligent in documenting everything I did, and I carried that lesson with me when I advanced to leadership. And my motto, as my employees would tell you, is if it's not documented, it's not done. And so I would ensure that the teams I led would develop and verify documentation as part of project implementation, because I found that if we didn't, things just didn't work right. I hired caring and competent team members. We had documentation in place, but there seemed to always be a gap. We screwed up way more than we should have. And that's, IT is complicated, work is complicated. Everybody's got distractions in their job. And there's still that human factor of trying to get your work done, to serve a user in the rush of the moment, and you forget a step. For us, that would be, we forgot to install anti-malware after reinstalling the operating system on a laptop. So a keylogger got installed. Not good. So sometimes those little mistakes, those little things that you miss can have big implications. So even though we tracked all of our service requests in a ticketing system and we had documented procedures, because I felt that was important, there was still this gap between that ticketing workflow and those standard operating procedures. So that's where TaskTrain came from. When I read the book, The Checklist Manifesto, by Atul Gawande, you may have heard of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really compelling book, because he describes the use of checklists in construction and in aviation and his own area, of course, of health.
The operating room, yes.
Yeah, in the operating room. I was just amazed. Like, it's something so simple that as a checklist, like he developed the safe surgery checklist for the World Health Organization. And they saw like a 40% reduction in deaths and a 36% decrease in major surgical complications. These are experts, right? These are highly trained people doing jobs that they execute every single day, but still had profound impacts from something very simple like a checklist. And that was sort of the crystallizing event for me to build TaskTrain, which is that integrated standard operating procedure management platform that allows you to integrate those processes that you have documented, those SOPs, into your everyday workflow.
Right. So Keith, let's start from the beginning. Why process? I mean, you already gave us a lot of it, but let's see if we can consolidate it to a few let's make a checklist of why processes, right? Why processes and procedures? I'm sure some entrepreneurs are listening to us right now and you go, yeah, it's such a big task. It's a daunting task. I'm doing fine. I don't have time for it. We heard all of it, right? I mean, this is not something, I'll get to it someday, but right now I really have to handle my production, etc. So why processes and procedures?
Yeah, right. Let me first just say that I know that there are very few people who like writing documentation. I'm not even one of them myself, but I've come to understand the importance of it. So let me talk about.
But you know how much I love it, so I'm one of them.
Yeah, exactly. So you're exceptional. But for a lot of people, it just feels like work about work, right? And people don't have time for what they consider administrivia. But I think that properly done, effective documentation can actually save you time wasted and inefficient and inconsistent work that can be avoided with a well thought out and documented procedure, time that's lost to rework and apologies for making up for mistakes that could have been avoided by using a checklist in the first place. There's time just saved by not having to look everything up from a bunch of different sources or working it out through trial and error if it's a solution to a business process that occurs over and over again. So, you asked about why. Those are the background reasons why. I think there are like at least 6 separate categories of those. And I would say that they are error proofing is top on my list, right? I mentioned in the outset, like we made mistakes way too often, and
it's risk mitigation. That's true.
Yeah, I just am easily embarrassed. So reducing those avoidable errors and increasing your service quality or your product quality by implementing SOPs. I would say that's a big driver for why to do it. Second, efficiency. Right? I mentioned just a moment ago that you can save time by standardizing your work. If it's something that you're going to be doing over and over again, taking a bit of time ahead of time to write out the most efficient way to do it and test that out and refine it over time will end up saving you time in the long run because you've got the most efficient sequence of steps. So those are 2 big ones. I think third, just delegation, right? Too many people are overworked and overstressed because only they know how to do some critical business process in their organization. Whereas if it were documented, you as the boss, as the manager, might be able to delegate that to someone else. So just very practical reasons, and also ends up being a time saver in the long run if you have that documentation done. And likewise, related to that is just, training in general. So apart from being able to delegate the work, just getting new employees up to speed that first time around, if your procedures are documented, becomes so much easier than having to explain it, especially if you're doing a lot of hiring, explaining it over and over and over again. Certainly, you've got to put extra emphasis in on that first-time training, but you'll still save time and be able to provide just-in-time training to reinforce the initial onboarding learning for your employees if it's documented. And then there are some other less immediate reasons, but you mentioned risk. I think that business risk in general, business continuity is right. A reason. So if you are, apart from just wanting to delegate, like you're the only person in the company who knows how to do something, there's the proverbial hit by a bus problem, right? So you don't want to have an employee who is the only one who knows how to run payroll or whatever their critical role is, because if they're out sick, if heaven forbid something happens to them, that's
also if they decide to look for work somewhere else, because I've been noticing it with a lot of my clients. That's what's happening. And that's part of what's happening right now with the economy is There's a lot of transition, a lot of change, I would say, in terms of the workforce. And if you actually have that documented, then that knowledge is not gone, because waiting to document that knowledge when the employee already gave notice is a little bit difficult. Because they're already 1 foot out the door. Sometimes you just want them to be out the door because you don't want to keep somebody there that doesn't want to be there, right? But now you have to also get them to give you all this knowledge, which even if they have the best of intentions, sometimes it's really hard to do it within a period of 2 weeks, right? Or even a month. It's much better to do it throughout the time that they're actually working and engaged in work. So I agree with you. The knowledge transfer is huge.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And so many reasons to integrate that as a practice into your organization's workflow, to have your employees document what they do as they're doing it. So that reference is there to cover you for risk mitigation, business continuity, and the other reasons for error proofing, efficiency, delegation, et cetera, rather than waiting until it becomes a crisis. Either the person has left or is leaving and they need to do it under a crunch. That's absolutely true. And then there's some external reasons as well, like the one that comes to mind is compliance. So that's sort of the reason number 6. You may just have to have your procedures documented if you are a regulated entity. Like there might be some auditor that you need to show your procedures to, and then show that you followed those procedures, either, especially in accounting, that's the case. For companies who have quality management systems in place, the International Standards Organization 9001 series, and there are many other environmental standards as well that can require you to have documented systems.
Right. So and also on that point, Keith, really, it's either the industry, you have to do it because that's the industry you're in, you're a regulated industry, and you do have to have those processes and procedures. But also from my experience, there can be different levels that you can achieve if you show that you have documented processes and procedures, and you can actually pass a certain test or comply with some regulations, then to show that you actually have that level of quality within your organization, which will push you to the next level. I've seen it with clients that I have in the construction arena, in the financial arena. So it's not necessarily something that everyone has to in order to operate, but if you have it, then you get the extra seal of approval. So that can be also something that differentiates you from your competitors. Exactly.
A great competitive differentiator. And there are, depending on your industry, a variety of different certifications you can get that depend on this. There's the sort of the general ones like the capability and maturity model. And in my background, IT, that's one that there are variants for, specifically adapted for IT operations, but you can go from, a level 0 organization where there are only ad hoc processes that happen. You'd be hard pressed to even call them processes because they're ad hoc. They don't necessarily repeat the same sequence over and over again. To level 5, right, where you've got everything that you're doing on a consistent basis documented, and you are following those best practices, procedures, and have demonstrated quality on the top. So I think that's a great variant as well, and another reason that you may, once you get started, be able to get ahead of your competition at an organizational level, looking out rather than just the internal reasons that I mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. Okay. So now we talked about the reason. I always like to start with the why. So for me, it's really important for when we engage on a process documentation project is to really figure out what is the why for that particular company, right? So we have the reasons we just named, but what is your why from all those reasons? Or what? That's what I ask the client, right? What is your why? Why do you want to do it? And then let's really have that in mind, because if you don't have a purpose to do it, it just goes nowhere, right? So let's say we agree on the why. How do we get started? What is your methodology? What's your advice on how to get started on a process documentation project?
Right. So I think I would absolutely start in the same place you did. What is your why? And those 6 or so categories. One of those is probably going to be top for you, but you could actually go so far as to weighing their importance. Like I like to use a 0 to 4 Likert scale. So 4 is extremely important, 3 is very important, 2 moderately, 1 slightly, and 0 is just not importantly at all. That can bring some clarity to those different reasons, business continuity or training or efficiency or delegation. And then, you'll probably have some things that pop to mind immediately, but I like to, if you're just taking a very thoughtful approach, actually to produce a procedure inventory and then prioritize that entire catalog of undocumented procedures against the priorities that you have, against your whys, the priorities that you have generated. So you can, I think, do an environment scan to generate a list of potentially undocumented procedures that you might want to get in place. Like I said, some will come to mind immediately, but you can also look at your existing position descriptions. That's often a great place, right? Because you've had to put these out to hire for the positions anyway, and in those bullet points of what the person is doing, do you have the documentation for how those things are supposed to be done? Sometimes just looking at the org chart will give you ideas as well, because of just what the title of the position is and what their function is in the organization. Likewise, you may have some top-level planning calendars that you use. I've worked in schools, and we have planning calendars because the academic year, we do the same thing every year for a new cohort of students. Not all businesses are like that, but you may have your annual cycle of promotions, right? That you run your Black Friday promotion or your New Year's promotion or something like that. All of those will suggest a series of processes underneath them that you may need to look at. In IT, we have the idea of a service portfolio, which is really a generic idea, but it's a place that you keep the list of services that your function in the organization produces. So, for an IT department, they're going to be providing email services and file access services and printing services, things like that. For the accounting department, right, they're providing the payroll service for the organization, and maybe the human resources has the onboarding and the offboarding services and compliance services. So all of those things, whether or not they're formally documented in a service portfolio that a department keeps, or whether they're just like, these are the services that this department has to provide, can be a source for undocumented procedures.
Right.
And then there are a few other top level, like your strategic plans, your project plans and task lists, and even your inventories, like your asset inventories of what you own in your organization. Well, there are probably maintenance cycles that are associated with those and maintenance checklists that goes within them. So you can gather up all of those procedures and rank order them against the priorities that you have generated to create really a heat map of where you should start if you're really struggling with this. So I like
agree. That's what I.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that, because for me, it's you have the why, and then what I always ask is, which area of the company, if you had well documented processes and procedures, you will get the biggest return on investment.
Yes.
Now, the biggest return on investment is not necessarily money. It can be the return on investment of getting whatever your why is. I mean, if it is that you have a lot of turnover and you're afraid that you're going to lose the key, the knowledge in your organization. So that will be a return on investment, that you know that your knowledge is protected. And you say, yeah, I have that employee in my sales department that if he or she leaves, I don't know what I'm going to do. I won't be able to generate the sales, or I won't be able to follow the process, or they are the only ones who know how to do certain things. So I will resolve that. So that is the area where we start in order to get the biggest return on investment, which is basically what you were saying. We can do a whole inventory and then assess the inventory against the why and see where to start. Because I really think, and let me know if you agree with that, is that going into a project of process documentation can be pretty daunting and overwhelming for some people.
Yes. So no, I totally agree with that. And probably even the process that I've described, thinking about it, sounds overwhelming to a lot of people. But they're just, high level factors that you want to think about to prioritize. The key thing is to prioritize. The method that you do that is secondary. But what you said, Adi, is that you need to keep the return on investment top of mind, whatever that is for your organization. And I like to look at sort of two questions you can ask for each of the categories of drivers that might be, driving you for this, like improving efficiency to get more output, more productivity in your organization, or reducing errors if that is there are major costs of quality there for doing that, or that risk mitigation for the person who might leave, who's got, they're the brains of the department, and if it's undocumented, right? So you can look at impact, and then you can look at likelihood. So, and I even like, again, to put a numeric score on this, like a 7-point scale. The impact question is, what's the potential negative impact for something in this area, a procedure not being documented and followed, and then the likelihood is the probability of that happening, given the frequency of the execution of whatever procedure it is that you're talking about. And you can use a scale for each of those if you really want to get scientific about it and actually create a heat map and are just stuck about thinking about it. I'm a real analysis nerd, so I get bogged down in this level of detail, but you can just sort of informally do that as well. But those are the two things that I would look most closely at in assessing ROI.
I think it's great. Absolutely. And then, we have to take the same approach also in terms of the documentation itself, because what can happen is, again, I'd love to see if you also encountered the same thing, is that you can pick an area, but then, an area can have, let's say the area is sales, or it's hiring, or it's whatever operations that particular organization is involved in, right? Providing the service or selling the product or manufacturing the product. And then that area have several procedures in it, right? So for instance, sales, we can break it down into lead generation, into qualifying the lead, into doing the estimation, writing the proposal, closing, even before creating the presentation, closing, onboarding a new client. So there are different areas. Now, what can happen is that you pick one of those areas and you start documenting, but then you go very, very granular, really into the weeds, right? And you never cover the rest. So you go into too many details, too much, all this minutia, and you spend hours on doing it, but then you didn't really cover the rest, so you don't see the return on investment. Right. So I'm curious to see, what is your methodology in terms of making sure that everything is covered, and how do you go about ensuring that?
Right. Great insight. And I think that with limited time to devote to this is something you definitely need to pay attention to. Not only need to prioritize where you're going to focus your documentation efforts, but once you've chosen that, there needs to be a triage of how you're going to go about doing that. And two things come to mind. One is looking at another level of prioritization in that functional area. And so maybe first what you do before you go into documenting what needs to be done is map out the high level process for the area just very quickly. And, in part of my background is Six Sigma training, and we learned the lean methodology. And part of lean comes from the Toyota production system and manufacturing, and elimination of waste along what they call the value chain in your organization, right? So whatever it is that your organization does, there is from the suppliers that are bringing you the materials and resources that you need as inputs, all the way to the customers who are eventually consuming your product or service and hopefully paying you for that. Right, that critical path between those 2 points is the value chain of the organization, and some of the activities that go on in between there are called value-added activities, right? Because they actually directly lead to the next link of what the customer is demanding and the reason your organization ultimately exists. Some of them are non-value-added activities, and they're just things that you need to do, right? Well, I mean, maybe you don't, but that's a separate question. So if there are bottlenecks along that critical chain, I would spend your time on those processes that are the value-added processes, most likely ones, and you can map this down to even the organizational level within, even the departmental level within an organization, right? So if you're in a functional department and not thinking about the entire organization, you can think about, for human resources, what are the things that we just do that are overhead, that we do for bookkeeping, for our internal use, and what are the things that we are critically serving the rest of the organization with. Either way, you look at it at a departmental level or you look at it at the organizational level, it's the same. But prioritizing those on the critical chain, and especially those that may have bottlenecks or real risks associated with them. So that would be my first level, is that level of prioritization. And the second is, when you actually get to the documentation, there are things that you can do as well. I myself am a big fan of having a standard format for standard operating procedures, and that kind of standardization alone can be very helpful in. I
think so too. That's why I tell my clients, it's that's why the difference between documenting it on a system like yours, like TaskTrain, or a process documentation system, because it looks official. It looks like something they have to follow, as opposed to just a Word document that has no header, or it just doesn't look the same. It's just like, it's so important to actually have that uniformity and have that, make it look official, because then you know that this is something that needs to be followed. So I agree with you that the standardization and also the name convention that you give, so it's easy to find, right? So that's very important as well.
Yeah, there are a lot of things you can create prior to executing your projects of documenting your procedures to set standards and guidelines. And the naming convention you use can make things more efficient and easier to find. I think that's very important. And one thing about TaskTrain and many of the standard platforms you're talking about is that, unlike an unstructured Google Doc or SharePoint intranet site wiki document, we do enforce a particular standard for your structure. And that's, in our case, you can write your standard operating procedure as a multi-level outline. So you have clear and distinct steps. We allow you to have sub-steps up to 4 levels deep, optionally, if you want to go to that level of detail. But that really, I think, enforces a crispness on the level of documentation. So maybe you just start with the top 5 steps in the procedure, and that's your level of first pass documentation if you're using the standard format. And then you can start to fill in If there are steps that need to be followed and tracked separately, well, then you start to develop some sub-steps within each of those top 5 level steps for your procedure. And a platform like TaskTrain also allows a 3rd level of detail, but you don't have to fill all that in at once. So you can provide links for training materials, videos, your detailed parts manuals, depending on what your procedure is. If it's a maintenance procedure, diagrams, et cetera, that will give you that next level of granular detail. If you want it, if you want to give that just-in-time training to your employees who are carrying it out, but you don't have to put that into the beginning if you don't want to. You can start very simple and build and iterate from there.
Absolutely. So it's basically we start at a higher level. So we map the processes for the company. We figure out where to start with asking the return on investment question that aligns with the why. Then you choose that area. So let's say the sales area. So instead of now concentrating just on lead, how do you generate the leads and just write a whole dissertation about it, or just like go into a lot of details about that? Let's look at the overall, map the entire process. So you generate leads. I'm just giving the sales as an example. So it's lead generation, then qualification, then whatever you do for an estimate or the needs assessment or however you call it. Then from there, you can write a proposal, presentation of the proposal, close, and onboarding a client. So that will be like the process, basically mapping the process, figure out where do you get the most value? Like, again, ask the same question on the return on investment, like which are from those processes, which are the ones that are the most important, and then start documenting those. But when you use a system like TaskTrain, what happens is that you can document high level, like the core process itself. So let's say we take lead generation. So identify the key steps that need to be done in order to create the lead generation. From there, you can go one step deeper for each step and start explaining it. And if you want to, you can go a level deeper from there. But you don't have to do it all at the same time. You can move on. You can just identify the core ones, move on to how to qualify a lead, maybe go to the second step, move on to the next one, and then you can come back and fill all the information. And also, honestly, you can also utilize the other team members that you have. You don't have to write it all yourself. You can do it with write the higher levels, and then you can go and have other people fill in how they do it.
Right. And I think tell me how it works with your clients, but I think it's very important to have the people who are doing the work participate in writing this documentation, right? So
100%. Yeah, you have to
can't
find
just be the manager who's like handing down the checklist because maybe they haven't done the work in 5 years or maybe they've never done it, right? It's got to be realistic.
It is. You have to find the people that you want to clone and then clone them, and then you have them do it. And what I also like about TaskTrain is that you can utilize videos. I mean, you can actually record videos and you can upload it.
Yes.
Or you can upload screenshots. So you can upload document. You basically, if you're using a form, so you can have a screenshot of it or upload the document itself. So it's basically gives you this knowledge base where you can have everything in there, so you can actually train people very easily.
Yes.
So
and one note about that is I think that level of detail is great. And we have built that in so you can actually reuse those resources if it's applicable at one step. This video that you just uploaded in an entirely different procedure, you can reuse that same upload, but we don't overwhelm you with that at the same time. Like if you try, you could do that in a Google Doc, right? You could paste in your screenshot or your image. It's going to be like right there in the middle of the screen. Every time you look at that procedure, you got to scroll by the whole thing. Having a dedicated platform though means that when your employee is actually executing it, they can look at the description of that step, and if they know how to do it, boom, done. If they don't, it's optionally there for them to drill down to at the next level. So we do a little bit of information hiding and just in time provisioning of those extra detail of training materials that you don't get in just a plain document.
Exactly. You can have the different levels and accessibility. So if our listeners would like to try TaskTrain, what would they do?
Well, we have a free tier, so all you need to go to is tasktrain.app, app, and there's a sign up free option right there. You can use a slightly feature limited version of TaskTrain as long as you like to test it out, build as many procedures as you like, invite as many team members as you want. What we're doing right now is you can only have 5 open workflows, or what we call assignments, in the system. So that's what you get at the premium level right now if you pay for it. But the platform is completely open to try it out. In addition, I'll give you a link, and I'm happy to do demos for anyone who's interested as well. Excellent.
Okay, good. So the link will be a part of the podcast notes. So anybody that is interested, anyone that is interested can go and check it out. And before we end off, I also want to emphasize that the importance of using a platform like this is that it has version control, and it also allows you to assign the tasks to the team members, and you can also monitor who is doing the training. So that is very important, because they will have to sign off on the version. If it's a new version, you can have them sign off on it as well, right? So you have those, any changes can be made known to everyone and make sure that they know that it's being done. So that is it's a key part of making sure that all those processes that you spend so much time documented are actually followed by all.
Right. Yeah. In TaskTrain, we not only on the documentation side, but on the assignment side, track and display an audit history of every change that it's made and who made it at what time. So all of that is there and completely auditable as well if you need that for your organization.
That's great. Fantastic. Well, Keith, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. Wealth of information. And I always love to discuss processes and procedures, how to make them better, how to document, etc. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much, Adi.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.